Good day and welcome, America and beyond. I'm Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports. Patriotism in action, putting America first, New World Order dead last. I want to share a few things with you guys. I've been the unofficial caretaker of two kittens, and I have to say that I haven't had my own pets for many, many years. Although I love animals, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian when I grew up. And I always had a lot of pets when I was younger, and thankfully my parents allowed for that. And when I became an adult and I traveled and I had different jobs and different commitments, and I didn't take on those responsibilities. But I always would share in the care if someone else had in the household, or if someone needed someone to be a sitter for certain animals, or they just, I don't know, animals always have taken well to me. So I'm in a situation where I'm sharing with the care, although they're not officially mine. I'll probably be heartbroken when they leave. And it's pretty amazing. When people try to tell you that, well, animals are just born with instincts, and there's really no complex thought processes going on here. And they really don't have their own distinct personalities. And they're not creative, and they don't have certain emotions, and they sure do. Now, cats, for some people, can be a turnoff because they generally are pretty independent. But what I have found, because these two, especially the one, are very, very young, and they both came from separate mothers, and fathers, and they're pretty darn amazing. And so I have to try to sometimes, remember that how much time I've invested, because I got to get back to my work-related projects and other obligations. But I have to say that there's moments where they're hellcats. I mean, they're just demons on wheels. And then there's times where they're just as nurturing and as loving, and they just can make you melt. But the point I wanted to make was there was a 60 Minutes program, and they were talking about the fact that babies were kind of looked at that. They're just these little blobs, and they're cute, and they really don't think much, and it's until they get a tremendous amount of socialization, they really, there's not a lot going on. And so I forget the university. I think it was one of the universities in Massachusetts, but could have been Harvard or Yale, but it doesn't really matter. But during the 60 Minutes program, they were showing that babies, they're almost hardwired for morality, and they almost always know, what the right versus the wrong is. And if you saw it, you'll know what I mean. But during the program, they had these puppet shows. Sort of like our political puppets, and certain ones were the good and the bad, and there were certain rewards and risk, and almost invariably, I mean, pretty much overwhelmingly, the children would decide which one they had an affinity towards and which ones they would embrace, and they seemed to show care and interest towards. So I thought it was kind of interesting that, yes, whether it's humans or animals, we have a genetic blueprint. And animals, because they don't have as complex emotions as we do, and because they're not going to fully develop the way we would. Well, then again, some would argue the elephant, the whale, the dolphin, they are pretty, elevated in terms of their brains and their emotions, and I wouldn't argue that. But there's this backward view of animals, and I think almost babies, where we don't realize that there's a lot more going on. And we're just starting to tap into that, and it's really cool when you start to find that whether it's science, whether it's whatever endeavor of study and research and and just the whole process of learning and discovery, that there's more to life, and there's more to things than we realized, and we got to keep digging deeper, so that's something that really stimulates my brain, that really gets my creative juices going. So back to these incredible kittens. The there's different personalities, and there's different sensitivities, and but they've really bonded, and and it's amazing to watch them play and to interact, and the one gobbles up their food. The smaller boy kitten, the female, she's a little more finicky, and she takes her time with her meal, and so the other one's going to try to gobble up or get in there because he's fearless, and we want to make sure that they're both getting enough nutrition. So I'll separate them, and I'll put the little guy in a room. But as soon as she starts to hear him wailing because he wants out or he wants to attack her food, she'll go to that door and put her paw into the door to try to console him and to further connect. So anyway, I've been just pretty amazed by this, and all this could not have happened by a cosmic accident. Those who just want to believe that nature just somehow, in a miraculous way, everything just evolves. Well, there's just too much going on to just think that these are just basic instincts only, and they're completely hardwired. And so I just think that God's creativity and ingenuity and just absolute magnificence, I just come to a greater appreciation for the fact that there's more to this thing we call life, and that and I just have a great sense of reverence for the majesty and the magnificence and really kind of the magic, if you will, and the miracles of the Creator and the universe. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of share on a personal note that a profound influence these kittens have had on me, and I've learned a lot through those interactions about myself and about them, and just I feel about the Creator. So anyway, so enough on that. But it did. Now another thing that has affected me today is that my university, my alma mater, has finally made it to the big stage. Rutgers has always had, Rutgers University, great academics. But they've really have put together the academics and the athletics, but they were kind of out of sync with, all of a sudden they're just starting to make their stride in football. And the birthplace of football was with Rutgers and Princeton. And back in 1869, that's right. Wasn't played quite the same way, the game. But the Big Ten finally decided to expand to the East Coast beyond Penn State and State College. And so they first, yesterday it was Maryland. Today it was Rutgers. They both got the invites. They both accepted. And I was thinking of realignment. Well, it's sort of like the political structure in a way. I mean, the Founding Fathers believed that if you were being mistreated, and if and we're not talking about transient and light reasons. It's got to be something substantial. It's got to be something significant as to why you'd want to secede. That you'd want to separate yourself and start anew with a nation state, and or even within a state, like in California, there's been a lot of talk of dividing into three. I think that that's a good thing. Now, granted, I love the fact we had the 50 states. I love the fact that all the patriotic lore of indivisible, but the point of the matter is that we have to have some recourse. And we have to have a case of last resort as to what do we do if we cannot change the political dynamics, and if things become more insufferable, and becomes intolerable. The tyranny, not just trickle down, but just the avalanche of tyrannical governance, and the interference and the intrusion, and the as it pertains to states, as it pertains to the local communities. So I'm really glad that Ron Paul has spoken out on this. I'm glad that individuals from all the 50 states have gotten active. Yes, it's symbolic, but at some point, and there might be a crucial juncture, it may go beyond symbolic, and it's important for the general population to know that it's improbable, highly unlikely, but it's still possible, but not all that much because of where we stand today. But if enough people stood up, and if there were certain demands that for instance, what if the demands were a couple least populated states, and states that maybe they could say, you know what, this is your last chance. All you people that want to consider yourselves sovereigns, libertarians, individualists, see the state as the enemy, that you want, greater freedoms, all the anarchists, all the Occupy Wall Street, all you folks, all you misfits, all you rejects, all you fringers, all you fanatics. Maybe they'd say, okay, you guys can have, I'm just going to just throw it out there, Idaho and Montana. Well, that wouldn't be such a bad deal. Be an eclectic mix there. But again, you're not going to have, I don't know, I'm just talking out loud, and I'm just thinking this through, but, just don't follow the bullhorn bully and others that are going to try to get you to be the first to go and risk your life and shed blood in the streets, because just like in China and just like in other totalitarian regimes, they will use the military or the United Nations forces. And so many people are desperate for jobs and unwilling to stand up for what's right, that they will say, well, these are the nutcases. These are the people that we have to suppress. And so I'm not very hopeful on that front. But I still think by raising the issues, with the money issue and the Federal Reserve and the audit and perhaps the ending or the abolishment of the Fed, there always we have to be able to put forward our ideas, and it's better that these ideas at least get out there, even if they're scorned, even if they're ridiculed, even if we're being mocked. That's fine. But you know what? The Tea Party became completely useless and totally ineffectual during this political season. And so, based on the fact that they really, we do know that so much of the so-called Tea Party movement was really Republicans, pretending and posturing as Tea Partiers. But there was a core and there was a grassroots, just like there was a certain degree of, I think, sincerity, although it was a smaller percentage of the occupiers. But these movements either are instituted or instigated by the established order, or they're infiltrated to some degree and hijacked. And that's kind of what you had here, just like the Reform Party. That went nowhere, and there's no talk of the Perot Reform Party or movement. But, the Patriot movement has never gone away. And quite frankly, if you look at the Patriot movement, many of these movements today, whether it's the Truthers, the Birthers, even some of the Tea Party faction, but almost all of them have their roots and by extension come from the tax patriot movement, or you could say even the conspiracy science movement, because they're really, sometimes they're one and the same, but there's also people that are only concerned about the conspiracies and the cover-ups, and not so much in the tax patriot movement. I just happen to be involved, and my roots are from both, and so I understand these things. And so when someone says that, oh, this is not your granddaddy's Patriot radio, or even your daddy's Patriot radio. Well, these guys, even though they mock those that are part of the Patriot Freedom constitutional movements, if these people that started these movements, if they hadn't existed, these people would not even be on alternative, streaming radio or podcasting or blogging. So a lot of credit is due to the granddaddies of these movements. There was a program, and I mentioned it before, and I want to do a little bit of research before I do a presentation or a program on it, and that had to do with on the History Channel. I think it could have been biography, the Bio Channel, but I think it was history. And it was the men that they said made America, not controlled America. And it was fascinating, even from their perspective, somewhat mainstream perspective. They talked about these monopolizers, and it talked about these controllers, which were they were monopolies, and these were robber barons. And we're talking about the J.P. Morgans, and we're talking about the Rockefellers, the ones that were more easily identifiable in American enterprise or industries, and how they took control of these industries and the energy sector and the natural resources. But if you're coming from a similar perspective to mine, where it's more conspiratorial and even more controversial, you would have an appreciation for that, because you could pick up on a lot of those things and maybe draw somewhat different conclusions. But it was quite good, and I highly recommend that you view that. Now, some of you are saying, well, why aren't you talking about what's breaking out in the Middle East, and maybe it's the end of the world, maybe it's World War III? And no, there's enough of that out there already. Just like HAARP, they want to blame HAARP for every, and weather modification and weather wars and weather control. Again, let me remind you, Sandy, devastated New York, and guess where a lot of these monopoly bankers and financiers and controllers live? On Long Island. Okay, and many parts of Long Island were decimated, devastated, and also northern New Jersey. So this whole nonsense of everything's got to be a conspiracy and everything is ruled by these people. Well, they probably love the fact they get so much credit or blame, because yes, they have their hand in manipulation, and many things are controlled, but not everything. Sometimes they're actually natural disasters. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting was Rupert Murdoch recently sent out some tweets, and he was frustrated with the fact that, because you do have liberal and conservative Jews, and you have ones that it's just like any group, they don't all think alike. And so Murdoch was getting frustrated that he felt like the liberal Jewish press and media were not doing enough to support the state of Israel. And but his tweets were viewed as controversial because he was talking about the Jewish controlled media, and he had to apologize. And furthermore, he actually went to the ADL and asked for their forgiveness, because he said he was really trying to protect their people, and he the words didn't come out all that well. I want to talk a little more about that from a couple different vantage points. on another broadcast. But I'm Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports, Patriotism in Action.